If you had asked me a year ago to describe my life, I would have used words like stable, content, maybe even blessed. I wasn't naive. I knew life had its complexities, its hidden struggles, but from my vantage point, looking out from the bay window of our suburban home, the world felt orderly. We had the 2-car garage, the well-tended garden Sarah was so proud of, and a mortgage that was more of a familiar companion than a burden. We had 15 years of shared history, a comfortable rhythm that felt like the gentle hum of a well-oiled machine. Our lives weren't a grand, passionate opera. They were a quiet, beautiful melody played in a familiar key. And every Tuesday night, for the last 5 of those years, a central part of that melody was Sarah's book club. The book club was, to me, the epitome of Sarah. It was intellectual, it was social, it was organized. It was her one night a week that was completely her own, and I was not just supportive of it, I was proud of it. In a world where people were losing themselves in mindless scrolling and reality TV, my wife was part of a small, dedicated group of women who actually discussed literature. They tackled the heavy hitters, the Booker Prize winners, the dense historical fiction sagas, the critically acclaimed but challenging contemporary authors I'd only ever read reviews of. I pictured them in my mind, gathered in someone's cozy living room, maybe Brenda's or Carol's, sipping Chardonnay, the air thick with thoughtful debate, pages dog-eared and bristling with sticky notes. It was a wholesome, sophisticated image that fit perfectly into the mosaic of the life I believed we were living. The Tuesday ritual was etched into the fabric of our week. Around 7 o'clock, Sarah would give me a quick kiss, her lips always tasting faintly of the mint she'd have after dinner. She'd have her tote bag slung over her shoulder, a statement piece I'd bought her for her birthday one year, canvas with leather straps, weighty with what I assumed was the book of the month and a notebook. "Don't wait up," she'd say with a smile. "You know how Carol gets when we get into the third act." I'd wave from the doorway as she backed her SUV out of the driveway, the taillights shrinking into red dots before disappearing around the corner. I never felt a pang of loneliness or suspicion. I felt a quiet satisfaction. This was what a healthy, modern marriage looked like. Space, trust, separate interests that enriched the whole. My Tuesdays were my own as well. Sometimes I'd catch up on work, spreading spreadsheets across the dining room table where we just shared a meal. More often, I'd sink into the worn leather of my favorite armchair, put on a game, and let the familiar drone of the commentators wash over me. I'd have a beer, maybe 2. It was a comfortable solitude. Around 11:30, sometimes closer to midnight, I'd hear the garage door rumble open. A few minutes later, Sarah would come in, cheeks slightly flushed, eyes bright. She'd always look energized, animated by the intellectual sparring of the evening. "It was a good one tonight," she'd often say, kicking off her shoes by the door. We really tore into the symbolism of the migratory birds. Brenda had a wild theory. I'd ask a few perfunctory questions. "So, did you guys like it overall? Was the ending satisfying?" Her answers were always plausible, articulate, filled with just enough detail to paint a picture. She'd talk about a character's problematic motivations or the author's brave narrative choices. I'd nod along, absorbing the second-hand intelligence, feeling proud of her. Looking back, I see the flaw in the painting, the crack in the veneer. Her summaries, while articulate, were becoming generic. In the early days of the club, she would come home practically vibrating with passion, thrusting the book at me and saying, "You have to read this, Mark." The way she described the dust of the prairie, I could taste it. She'd recount specific fiery arguments, who took what side, the exact turn of phrase that made everyone gasp. But over the last year or so, that fiery detail had cooled into a more polished, detached summary. It was like she was giving a book report, not reliving a passionate debate. But I didn't see it then. I chalked it up to the natural evolution of things, the mellowing of a routine. It was just the book club, a constant, predictable part of our happy, predictable life. It was the anchor of our week. I had no idea it was the anchor that was dragging me down into the deep. I had no idea that the foundation I was standing on wasn't solid ground, but a cleverly disguised trapdoor, and it was about to swing open. The change didn't happen like a thunderclap. It was more like a slow shift in the atmospheric pressure, a subtle drop in temperature that you feel in your bones before you can name the reason. For a long time, the Tuesday routine remained the same comfortable backdrop to our lives. But one Tuesday night in late autumn, something was different. Sarah came home a little after 11:30, same as always. She dropped her tote bag by the door, the familiar soft thud on the hardwood floor. I got up from my armchair to greet her, and as I wrapped my arms around her, I was enveloped in a scent. It wasn't Sarah's scent. For 15 years, Sarah had worn the same perfume, a light, clean fragrance that smelled like white tea and ginger. It was as much a part of her as her soft brown hair or the constellation of freckles across her nose. This was something else entirely. It was musky, complex, and deeply floral, with a note of something like sandalwood. It was a nighttime scent, a perfume for an occasion, expensive and alluring. It was the kind of perfume a woman wears for a man who is not her husband. That last thought surfaced and was immediately submerged. My mind, a loyal protector of its own peace, scrambled for other explanations. "Wow, new perfume?" I asked, trying to sound casual as I pulled back. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh, this? Carol got a bottle for her anniversary and was showing it off. She sort of sprayed the whole room with it. It's a bit much, isn't it?" And just like that, there it was. A plausible explanation, delivered with a casual shrug. Carol, the flamboyant one. Of course, it made sense. So I let it go. I accepted the explanation because rejecting it was unthinkable. Rejecting it meant considering an alternative so monstrous, so destabilizing, that my entire world would fracture. So I chose to believe in Carol and her overpowering new perfume. But the seed was planted. It was a tiny, insidious thing, and it began to sprout in the fertile ground of that single inconsistency. The following week, I found myself waiting for her to come home with a strange sense of alertness. I wasn't suspicious, I told myself, just aware. When she walked in, I leaned in for a hug, inhaling discreetly. White tea and ginger, her usual scent. A wave of relief washed over me, so potent it almost made me laugh at my own foolishness. See? It was just Carol's perfume. Everything was fine. But the relief was short-lived, because my newly awakened senses were now scanning for other things. Things I'd never thought to notice before. A couple of Tuesdays later, I was cleaning out her car as a surprise for her, vacuuming the floor mats and wiping down the dashboard. Tucked into the side pocket of the driver's side door, I found a receipt. It was from a place called the Gilded Hour, a cocktail lounge I knew of. It was downtown in the trendy, renovated warehouse district. The kind of place with $20 drinks and dim lighting. The date on the receipt was from the previous Tuesday. The timestamp was 9:47 p.m. The items were 2 glasses of Malbec. My mind went into overdrive trying to make the pieces fit. The book club rotated houses, yes, but they were all here in the suburbs. Carol, Brenda, Maria, they all lived within a 15-minute drive. The Gilded Hour was 40 minutes away, downtown, in the opposite direction of everything we knew. And the book club drank Chardonnay, not Malbec. Sarah always joked about how they were in a Chardonnay rut. When she got home from work that day, I held up the receipt. Again, I aimed for casual. "Hey, found this cleaning your car. Did the book club have a field trip?" I was trying to make it a joke, to offer her an easy way to explain it. Her eyes flickered to the slip of paper in my hand, and for a split second, I saw something I'd never seen before. Panic. It was gone in an instant, replaced by a smooth, practiced smile. "Oh my God, I totally forgot to tell you," she said, her laugh a little too loud. Maria's sister was in town, and she wanted to take us somewhere fancy after we finished discussing the book. It was a last-minute thing. We were only there for one drink. It was plausible, just like the perfume story. It was perfectly, reasonably plausible, but it felt wrong. The pieces fit, but they were forced. The image was clear, but it felt doctored. 2 plausible explanations back-to-back for 2 things that had never happened in 5 years of book club meetings. A statistical anomaly. Coincidence. That's what I told myself. But the knot in my stomach, the one that first appeared with the scent of unfamiliar perfume, tightened. I was no longer a content husband living a blessed life. I was becoming an investigator in my own home, and I was beginning to fear what I might find. The two plausible explanations hung in the air of our home like a fine dust, settling on everything and dulling its shine. On the surface, nothing had changed. We still ate dinner together, we still talked about our days, we still slept in the same bed. But I was no longer fully present. I was a ghost in my own life, observing everything through a newly acquired lens of suspicion. Every time Sarah's phone buzzed, I would feel a jolt of adrenaline. Every time she laughed a little too long at a text message, a cold dread would pool in my gut. I hated myself for it. I hated the man I was becoming, jealous, paranoid, a spy in the house of love. I felt a profound sense of shame. This was Sarah, the woman who knew my every flaw and loved me anyway. The woman who held my hand at my father's funeral. The woman I had built a life with. And I was mentally accusing her of the ultimate betrayal based on a whiff of perfume and a bar receipt. For a week, I fought the urge. I told myself to let it go, to trust my wife, to believe in the 15 years of shared history over the two flimsy pieces of circumstantial evidence. Trust is a choice, I repeated to myself like a mantra. But the doubt was a venom, and it was spreading. The peace I was trying to force upon myself felt fragile, artificial. I realized that the only way to truly regain my peace of mind was to prove my fears wrong. I had to find concrete, irrefutable evidence that the book club was exactly what she said it was, that the perfume and the cocktail lounge were harmless anomalies. I had to snoop, not to catch her, I reasoned, but to exonerate her. I had to betray her trust in order to restore my own. The twisted logic of it all made my head spin, but the need for certainty was a physical thirst. The opportunity came on a Saturday afternoon. Sarah was out for what she said was a long run, followed by grocery shopping. The house was quiet, filled only with the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, a sound that usually comforted me but now felt like a countdown. My heart hammered against my ribs as I walked into our home office and sat down in front of our shared laptop. My hands were trembling slightly as I opened the web browser. Felt like a profound violation, a point of no return. I started with the browser history. My plan was simple. I would look at the history for the past several Tuesday nights. I expected to see something. Maybe she'd Googled the author of the month, or looked up reviews of the book. Something to corroborate her story. Instead, I found something far more chilling. Nothing. For every Tuesday, going back 2 months, the browsing history between the hours of 7 p.m. and midnight was completely blank. Wednesday mornings, however, often had a search entry, how to clear browser history on Chrome. A cold sweat broke out on my neck. This wasn't the work of an innocent person. Innocence is messy. It leaves a trail of random searches, forgotten tabs, and digital crumbs. This was clean. This was calculated. This was the deliberate wiping of tracks. My initial mission, to find evidence of her innocence, was already a catastrophic failure. A new, colder mission took its place. To find out the truth, no matter how ugly. I checked her email next. It was open and logged in. I scrolled through her inbox. My breath held tight in my chest. Nothing. No clandestine love letters, no secret accounts. I went to her social media. Her page was a monument to our perfect life. Photos of our garden, a selfie of us from our anniversary dinner, a link to an article about retirement planning. It was a carefully curated performance of marital bliss. I checked her direct messages with Carol and Brenda. The exchanges were brief and logistical. Are you hosting next week? Running about 10 minutes late. See you Tuesday. There was no mention of books. No discussion, no debate. No mention of Maria's sister or trips to the Gilded Hour. The conversations were shells, hollow and devoid of the substance they were meant to represent. The final frontier was the phone bill. I logged into our family plan account online, a place I usually only visited to pay the bill. I clicked on usage details, my stomach churning. I filtered the data logs for her number, focusing on the last 4 Tuesdays. And there it was, staring at me in black and white, a pattern as clear as day. On each of those nights, clustered between 7:30 p.m. and 11 p.m., was a series of calls and texts to and from a single number I did not recognize. It wasn't Carol or Brenda or her mother or anyone from her office. It was a local number, but it wasn't in her contact list, which I had nervously scrolled through on her phone one morning while she was in the shower. A flurry of communication on Tuesday nights, and then, for the rest of the week, complete silence. I stared at the string of digits, this ghost number, and felt a profound sense of vertigo. I hadn't found a smoking gun. I had found something worse. I had found a meticulously constructed alternate reality. I was standing in the middle of my life, but I no longer recognized the architecture. Every Tuesday night, my wife wasn't just leaving the house. She was leaving our entire world behind. Living with the knowledge I'd gleaned from her digital life was a unique form of torture. It was like knowing a house was rigged with explosives but not knowing the detonator code. The ghost number on the phone bill, the meticulously wiped browser histories, they were patterns, not proofs. If I confronted her with this, she would weave another plausible lie. She would create a narrative so convincing, so filled with hurt at my lack of trust, that I would end up being the villain. I'd be the paranoid husband who violated her privacy for no reason. She would turn my evidence into a weapon against me. I knew her well enough to know that I couldn't fight the phantom with phantom evidence. I needed something tangible. I needed to expose the lie, not the affair. I had to dismantle the stage before I could confront the actress. The plan that formed in my mind was simple, direct, and, in its own way, heartbreaking. I was going to read the book. A few weeks prior, in a moment of what I now recognized as performative enthusiasm, she had placed a novel on our kitchen counter. "The club's next pick," she'd announced. "It's supposed to be incredible. A real page-turner." The book was The Salt-Stained Map, a critically acclaimed bestseller about a cartographer who discovers a hidden secret about his family's past. It had been sitting on her nightstand ever since, untouched. The following Monday, I walked into a bookstore across town, the bell above the door chiming my entrance into this new, agonizing phase of my life. I felt like a fraud buying it, the cheerful cashier asking if it was for a book club. I managed a tight-lipped smile and said it was a gift. Reading that book was one of the most painful things I have ever done. I didn't read it for pleasure. I dissected it. I sat each night in my armchair, after Sarah had gone to bed, and I consumed that novel with the cold precision of a scholar studying a dead language. I wasn't following the protagonist on his journey. I was mapping the architecture of Sarah's lie. I memorized the names of secondary characters. I highlighted key passages. I made notes in the margins about the shocking twist in Chapter 12, where the protagonist discovers his father had a second family. I noted the specific, unusual detail about the rare blue ink used on the titular map. I absorbed every detail, every nuance, every turn of phrase, arming myself with an arsenal of undeniable facts. Each page I turned felt like shoveling another scoop of dirt onto the grave of my marriage. I was mourning the life I thought I had, one chapter at a time. By the time I finished it on Thursday night, I felt hollowed out, but ready. I was an expert on the salt-stained map. I knew it better than she ever would. I waited until Sunday. Sunday was our quiet day. We'd do the crossword together, garden, and make a nice dinner. It was the furthest you could get from the charged energy of a Tuesday night. We were sitting in the living room, a comfortable silence between us, as she scrolled on her phone, and I pretended to read the newspaper. The trap was set. My heart was a cold, heavy stone in my chest. "Hey," I began, my voice sounding unervingly normal. "I was reading a review of that salt-stained map book your club is reading. Sounds really intense." She looked up, a pleasant, placid smile on her face. "Oh, it is. We have so much to talk about this Tuesday. The writing is just beautiful." This was it. Time to spring the trap. "The review I read," I continued, folding the newspaper with deliberate slowness, "spent a lot of time on the twist with the father, the second family. Said it came out of nowhere. Did you guys see it coming at all?" I watched her face. It was like watching a computer trying to process a corrupted file. Her pleasant smile froze. Her eyes went blank for a fraction of a second as she searched her memory for a file that didn't exist. She had no idea what I was talking about. I could see the panic behind her eyes as she scrambled for a generic, non-committal answer. "Oh, the father," she said, her tone a little too bright. Yes, that was certainly a very complex part of the narrative. A lot of the women had strong feelings about that. It was a masterclass in saying absolutely nothing. She hadn't confirmed it, she hadn't denied it. She had just talked around it. I decided to tighten the screw. Yeah, but the way he finds out, through the letter hidden in the old desk, written in that specific blue ink. I thought that was a bit of a cliché, honestly. I had laid the bait perfectly. The blue ink was a tiny but unforgettable detail from the book. Her response would tell me everything. She blinked. "The ink, right?" "Yes." "Well, sometimes those classic tropes work for a reason," she stammered, her smile now a brittle, transparent thing. She didn't know. The lie was laid bare, twitching in the space between us. I didn't need to yell, I didn't need to accuse her. In that moment of her fumbling, her complete and utter ignorance of a book she was supposedly spending hours debating, the entire 5-year fiction of the Tuesday night book club crumbled into dust. I just looked at her, my expression unreadable, and in the profound, suffocating silence that followed, she knew that I knew. The stage was finally, irrevocably, gone. The silence that followed my question about the blue ink was a living entity in our house for the next 2 days. It sat between us at the dinner table. It lay in the bed, a cold, unmoving barrier. We spoke, of course, but the words were hollow, functional things. "Did you get the mail? We're out of milk. Good night." We were 2 actors on a stage, reciting lines from a forgotten play while the theater burned down around us. Sarah was a ghost, moving through the rooms with a brittle caution, her eyes avoiding mine. She knew she had been caught. The lie was exposed, but the truth was still hiding in the shadows, a monstrous shape we were both refusing to acknowledge. And all the while, the clock was ticking down to Tuesday. Tuesday arrived not with a storm, but with a sickening gray calm. The day crawled by, each minute stretching into an eternity. I went to work and stared at my computer screen, seeing nothing. I moved numbers around on a spreadsheet, but my mind was 1,000 miles away, rehearsing the night to come. I had made my decision in the cold, sleepless hours of Sunday night. I was done with digital ghosts and clever traps. I was done inferring the truth from what was missing. I needed to see it. I needed to stand before the truth, in all its ugliness, and look it in the eye. I needed to follow her. I left work at 4, telling my boss I had a migraine, which wasn't far from the truth. The pressure behind my eyes was immense. When I got home, she was already there, and the grotesque pantomime began. She was in the kitchen, humming a tune as she puttered around, a performance of domestic normalcy so flagrantly false it made my stomach turn. We ate dinner in near silence, the clinking of our forks against the plates a deafening rhythm counting down the final minutes of our life as we knew it. Then, at 7 o'clock, she began the ritual. She went upstairs and changed. She came down wearing a black dress I'd never seen before and the unfamiliar, musky perfume from that first night of doubt. She picked up her canvas tote bag, the prop that now seemed like a cruel joke, and walked over to me. "Don't wait up," she said, her voice a little shaky. She leaned in to kiss me, but I turned my head slightly so it landed on my cheek. Felt like being kissed by a stranger. I watched from the window as her taillights disappeared down the street, and then I moved. My keys were already in my pocket. My car was parked on the street instead of the garage, ready to go. I gave her a 2-minute head start, my heart hammering a frantic, brutal rhythm against my ribs. Adrenaline surged through me, cold and sharp. I pulled out onto the street and saw her SUV 2 blocks ahead, waiting at a stoplight. The chase began. Keeping a safe distance was an art form I learned on the fly, staying 3 or 4 cars back, my eyes locked on her vehicle. Every turn she made was a fresh betrayal. She didn't turn right, toward Carol's neighborhood. She didn't turn left, toward Brenda's. She drove straight, heading for the on-ramp to the interstate. My mind, in a last, desperate act of self-preservation, grasped at straws. Maybe they were meeting somewhere new, a restaurant halfway between everyone's houses? Maybe the book club had a secret, boisterous life I knew nothing about? But I knew. I knew as surely as I knew my own name that I was not following my wife to a book club. The suburbs melted away, replaced by the bright, anonymous lights of the highway. She drove confidently, merging and changing lanes with a familiarity that spoke of a well-traveled route. This wasn't a new journey for her. My hands gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I was following a ghost, a version of my wife I didn't know, into a life she had kept perfectly hidden. 20 minutes later, she exited, heading downtown toward the warehouse district, the same area where the Gilded Hour was located. My breath caught in my throat. The city streets were darker here, lined with upscale lofts, trendy bars, and boutique hotels carved out of old industrial buildings. And then I saw it. She slowed, flicked on her turn signal, and guided her car down the ramp into the underground parking garage of the Grand Hotel. A sleek, modern building of glass and steel. My blood ran cold. I waited a moment, my car idling on the street, then followed her down into the concrete belly of the beast. I drove past her parking spot, saw her gathering her purse and tote bag, and continued up 2 more levels. I found a dark corner, pulled in, and killed the engine. The sudden silence was absolute. I was here. I had followed the lie to its nest. I sat in the dark, the faint scent of her familiar white tea and ginger perfume still lingering in my car. A ghost of a life that was already gone. I stared at the concrete wall, knowing that somewhere, floors above me, the final, devastating truth was waiting. For a long time, I just sat there in the suffocating silence of my car. The engine ticked as it cooled, the only sound in my concrete tomb. My mind was a perfect, silent blank. The chase was over, the destination reached, and for a few paralyzing minutes, I had no idea what to do next. Part of me wanted to turn the key, drive up the ramp, and just go home. I could pretend this never happened. I could live with the ghost, the doubt, the lie. It would be a half-life, a poisoned existence, but it would be familiar. But I knew I couldn't. I had come this far. The poison was already in my veins. I had to know what kind it was. My movements were stiff, robotic, as if my body was being operated by some distant, detached part of my brain. I opened the car door, and the sound echoed in the cavernous garage. I got out, my legs unsteady beneath me. The air was cool and smelled of gasoline and damp concrete. I made my way towards the glass doors of the elevator lobby, my footsteps unnaturally loud on the gritty floor. I found a spot in the shadows, behind a thick, square pillar, where I could see the elevators without being seen. And then I waited. Every sound was magnified, every distant scrape of a tire on pavement, every hum of the building's ventilation. Minutes stretched into an eternity. My mind, which had been so blank, started to fill with a slideshow of horrors. I imagined her meeting a woman, a support group, a therapist, anything, any last-ditch, insane explanation that wasn't this. I was a drowning man, and these thoughts were the surface I could no longer reach. Then, the glass doors from the garage swung open, and it was her, Sarah. She walked into the bright, sterile light of the lobby, and my breath hitched in my chest. It was my wife, but it wasn't. She was wearing a simple black dress I'd never seen, one that was more elegant and form-fitting than anything she wore in our life. Her hair was done differently. She looked alive, more alive than I'd seen her in years. She checked her phone, a small, nervous smile playing on her lips. She looked like a woman waiting for a first date, filled with a nervous, hopeful energy. She paced a small circle, the canvas tote bag, that obscene prop, clutched in her hand. The sight of it here, in this place, filled me with a black, nauseating rage. A moment later, the elevator doors on the far side of the lobby slid open with a soft chime. A man walked out. He was tall, about my age, dressed in a sharp blazer and dark jeans. He looked confident, at ease. He wasn't classically handsome, but he had an air about him, a kind of easy charisma. He saw her, and his face broke into a wide, genuine smile. And then I watched as my wife's face lit up in a way I hadn't seen since our wedding day. It was a look of pure, unadulterated joy, of relief, of homecoming. It was a look she no longer saved for me. I was frozen behind the pillar, a spectator at the premiere of my own personal tragedy. This wasn't a nervous first date. This was a well-rehearsed routine. He walked directly to her, and without a word, he put one hand on the small of her back and leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a peck on the cheek. It was a real kiss, a deep, lingering kiss, filled with a familiarity and passion that stole the air from my lungs. I felt a physical blow, as if all the oxygen had been punched out of my body. The scene I had braced myself for was 1,000 times worse in reality. The visual, the undeniable proof was a brand on my mind. He pulled back, murmured something in her ear that made her laugh, a genuine, throaty laugh that I hadn't heard in so long. He took the tote bag from her hand with one of his and laced his other hand through hers. They looked like any other happy couple, checking into a hotel for a romantic getaway. They walked to the elevator he had just exited, their fingers intertwined. As they waited, he brushed a stray strand of hair from her face with a tenderness that made me physically ill. They stepped inside. His arm went around her waist, pulling her close. The doors slid shut, a final, metallic curtain on the life I once knew. I watched the numbers above the door light up. 1, 2, 3. They climbed higher and higher, carrying the two people who had just destroyed my world up into a private heaven I had unknowingly paid for. 9, 10. The light stopped. Then it went out. They were gone. And I was alone in the cold, humming silence. The afterimage of their kiss burned permanently onto the back of my eyes. I don't remember the drive home. I'm sure I stopped at red lights and used my turn signal, my body performing the mundane tasks of navigation on autopilot, but my mind was elsewhere. It was still in that concrete parking garage, standing behind a pillar, watching a ghost of my wife kiss a stranger. The image played on a continuous, brutal loop. The look on her face, the intimacy of their touch, the finality of the elevator doors. When I pulled into our driveway, the house looked alien, like a place I was visiting for the first time. The cheerful yellow front door, the neatly trimmed hedges. It all seemed like a facade, a flimsy movie set, and I had just seen what happens when the cameras stop rolling. Inside, the silence was different from before. It was no longer a silence of tension. It was the silence of a tomb. I walked through the rooms of my life, my home, and saw everything with new eyes. A framed photo of us on the mantelpiece, smiling on a beach in Hawaii, felt like a picture of two strangers. The quilt on our bed, the one her grandmother made, looked like a museum artifact from a lost civilization. Every object was a monument to a lie. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a whiskey, the amber liquid catching the light. The first sip burned, a welcome, grounding pain in the midst of my freefall. I didn't get a second. I needed to be sober for this. I needed to be sharp. I sat down at the kitchen table, the one where we shared thousands of meals, and I waited. The bright, overhead lights were on, buzzing faintly. I wanted her to see my face clearly. It was almost midnight when I heard the familiar rumble of the garage door. My heart, which I thought had been shocked into numbness, began to pound a slow, heavy drumbeat. I heard her keys jingle, the click of the lock. The door from the garage into the kitchen swung open, and she stepped inside. She had a soft, tired smile on her face, the lingering glow of her evening still with her. She was expecting a dark, quiet house. She was expecting me to be asleep. The smile vanished the second she saw me. She froze, one hand still on the doorknob, her eyes widening as she took in the scene. Me, sitting at the table in my jacket, the harsh overhead lights, the unreadable expression on my face. "Mark," she said, her voice small, laced with confusion. "What are you doing up? Is everything okay?" Her question was so absurd, so profoundly disconnected from the reality that was about to crash down on her, that I almost laughed. I just looked at her, letting the silence stretch, letting her discomfort grow. "How was the book club tonight, Sarah?" I asked. My voice was unnervingly calm. devoid of any emotion. It was the calm at the center of a hurricane. She started the script, her training taking over. Oh, it was good. A little tense, actually. Brenda and Carol really got into it over the symbolism of the "Stop," I said. The single word cut through the air like a shard of glass. Just stop. Her mouth snapped shut. The color drained from her face. She knew. This wasn't a guess. This wasn't suspicion. This was the end. There is no book club, I said. My voice still level, each word a carefully placed stone. There has never been a book club, has there? I know you didn't read the salt-stained map. I watched her swallow, her mind racing, searching for an escape route where there was none. I decided to close the final door. I'm tired of the lies, Sarah, so just tell me one thing. How was your stay at the Grand Hotel tonight? The name of the hotel landed in the quiet room with the force of a physical blow. She flinched, her whole body recoiling as if I had struck her. Her face crumpled, the carefully constructed mask of the dutiful wife, the intellectual book lover, shattered into a million pieces, revealing the terrified, guilty woman underneath. Mark, I don't know what you're... She stammered, the lie dying on her lips. And that's when the calm broke. A tidal wave of rage, grief, and 15 years of betrayed love crested inside me. Don't! I roared, slamming my hand on the table, the sound echoing like a gunshot. Don't you dare lie to me again. Not in this house. Not to my face. She jumped back, tears instantly welling in her eyes. I saw you, Sarah. I saw you in the parking garage. I saw you kiss him. I saw you get in that elevator. So you tell me, who the hell was that man? Who have you been seeing every Tuesday night while I sat in this house like a fool, proud of my wife and her goddamn book club? The questions poured out of me, a torrent of pain. The storm had finally broken, right here in our kitchen, and it was threatening to wash away everything we had ever been. My roar echoed in the sudden, ringing silence of the kitchen. Sarah crumpled, not physically but emotionally. It was a complete deflation, the final exhale of a lie she had been holding in for years. She slid down the wall, her back against the pantry door, and buried her face in her hands. Sobs racked her body, ugly, gasping sounds that held none of the grace she usually carried. For a moment I felt nothing. The part of me that would have rushed to comfort her was dead, a casualty of the man in the elevator. I stood there, my hands still flat on the table, my knuckles white, and I watched her break. Who is he? I asked again, my voice a low, dangerous growl. The rage had burned through, leaving behind a cold, hard resolve. I needed a name. The phantom needed a face. She shook her head, her words muffled by her hands. It doesn't matter, Mark. It doesn't change anything. It changes everything, I said, my voice rising again. It tells me who you risked this for, who you destroyed our life for. Give me his name, Sarah. Now. She looked up, her face streaked with tears and mascara. Her eyes were wide with fear, not just of my anger, but of speaking the truth aloud, of making it irrevocably real. She took a shuddering breath. David, she whispered, the name barely audible. David Morrison. The name hit me like a punch to the gut. David Morrison, not a stranger. A former colleague of hers from the marketing firm she'd left 3 years ago. I had met him 3 or 4 times at company holiday parties. I had shaken his hand. He was a smarmy, overly confident guy I had instantly disliked but tolerated because he was her coworker. I remembered him complimenting my tie once. The memory was now coated in a thick, greasy layer of filth. The betrayal wasn't just abstract anymore. It had a face, a handshake, a name. How long? The question was clipped, brutal. I was an interrogator, pulling the facts of my life's destruction from a hostile witness. 2 years, she sobbed. A little over 2 years. 2 years. 104 Tuesdays. 104 trips to the Grand Hotel. 104 lies, each one built upon the last. The sheer scale of the deception was breathtaking. The book club had been real at first for the first 3 years. Then, It had fizzled out, the women getting busy with kids and life. But she had kept it going, kept the slot in our weekly schedule open. It was a perfect, pre-made alibi, and when David had re-entered her life, she had simply repurposed it. The story spilled out of her in a torrent of shame and self-justification. She'd run into him at a coffee shop. They'd had lunch. The lunches became more frequent. He was recently divorced, he understood her. He saw her. That was the word she kept using. He saw me, Mark. She tried to explain, to make me understand the why. She spoke of our life, our comfortable, stable life, as if it were a prison. She called it a routine, a passionless partnership. She said I looked at her but didn't see her anymore. I saw a wife, a partner, the co-manager of our household, but I didn't see her. David, she claimed, saw the woman she used to be. He listened. He complimented her. He made her feel exciting and desirable, not just dependable. I listened to her reasons, and all I heard was the pathetic, selfish whining of a woman trying to justify the unjustifiable. She was painting me as the villain, the neglectful husband who had driven her into the arms of another man. So what was I supposed to do, Sarah? I cut in, my voice dripping with ice. Was I supposed to applaud the fact that you paid the mortgage on time? Was I supposed to write you a sonnet every time you unloaded the dishwasher? We had a life, a real life, not a movie. It was built on trust, on the day in and day out work of being a partnership. And you threw it all away for cheap compliments from a guy I shook hands with. She flinched but kept talking, confessing the logistics of the lie. The tote bag was a prop. She'd keep an actual book in it, the one she'd mentioned to me, but she'd never open it. Sometimes, on her way to the hotel, she'd scroll through a few reviews online, just in case I asked any specific questions. It was a 5-minute preparation for a 5-hour lie. The whole elaborate fiction was a house of cards, and she had been so confident, so certain of my trust, that she never thought for a second that I would ever try to blow it down. By the time the sun began to hint at its arrival, the kitchen was a wasteland. All the secrets were out, lying like broken glass on the floor between us. She was exhausted from crying, and I was exhausted from the sheer, crushing weight of the truth. Her confession hadn't brought clarity or closure. It had just given names and dates to my pain. It was a detailed blueprint of my own humiliation. The question was no longer what she had done, but what I was supposed to do with the rubble of the life she had left me in. As dawn broke, it cast a pale, unforgiving light into the kitchen, illuminating the two exhausted strangers sitting at the table. The storm of the confrontation had passed, leaving a profound and desolate quiet in its wake. There were no more tears, no more shouts. All the secrets were out, lying exposed and ugly between us. We had talked and yelled and wept for hours, and now nothing was left. I looked at Sarah, her face puffy and stained with mascara, and I felt a terrifying emptiness. The woman I had loved for 15 years was gone. In her place was a person I didn't know, a person capable of a level of deception I couldn't comprehend. I felt no pity, no empathy, just a vast, cold distance. "I'm going to the guest room," I said into the silence. My voice was flat, hollow. It wasn't a suggestion or a point of negotiation. It was a statement of fact, the first official decree of our new world order. She nodded numbly, not meeting my eyes. I stood up on stiff legs, walked out of the kitchen, and didn't look back. I gathered my pillow and a blanket from her bed, the scent of her on the pillowcase now repulsive to me. I closed the guest room door behind me, and the click of the latch felt like a border wall being erected in the heart of our home. The days that followed were the longest of my life. We were living together, but we were utterly separate. The house, once a source of comfort and shared history, became a suffocating prison. We were ghosts haunting the same hallways, orbiting each other but never making contact. I would hear the shower run in the master bathroom and know she was in there, and I would wait until the sound stopped before I would leave my room. We communicated through necessity, brief, functional texts about bills or a piece of mail. "The electricity bill is due Friday. Your Amazon package arrived." There was no love, no hugs and kisses, not even a name. We were just two administrators of a shared property. Her presence was a constant, low-level torture. I'd see her reading on the sofa in the living room, a space where we had cuddled and watched 1,000 movies, and I would be consumed by a cold, quiet rage. She tried, in her own broken way, to bridge the chasm. She'd make dinner and leave a plate for me, covered on the counter. I would throw it away after she went to bed. One evening, she knocked softly on the guest room door. "Mark," she said, her voice tentative. "Can we please talk?" I just lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, and said nothing. I heard her wait for a full minute before her soft footsteps retreated down the hall. Her attempts to connect felt like an insult. They weren't for me. They were for her. They were an effort to alleviate her own crushing guilt, and I refused to be her absolution. My mind was a torture chamber of its own design. Memories I had once cherished were now poisoned. I'd remember a weekend trip we took last fall, how happy we'd seemed, and then the cold math would kick in. The affair was already a year old by then. Was she texting him from the hotel bathroom while I slept? Did she look at me and wish I were him? Every happy memory was now a potential scene of her betrayal. Love letters from our early years, stored in a box in the closet, now read like fiction written by a stranger. The foundation of our shared history had been retroactively dynamited. I was grieving a marriage that I was realizing had been a lie for years. I spent my time in that guest room grappling with the inevitable question. Divorce. The word itself was an earthquake. It meant lawyers and dividing assets and telling our families. It meant tearing down the entire structure of my adult life. A small, cowardly part of me wondered if we could survive this. People did, didn't they? They went to therapy, they rebuilt trust. But as I lay there in the dark, I knew it was impossible. The turning point came on a Thursday night, about a week after the confrontation. I walked into the kitchen to get a glass of water, and she was on the phone, her back to me. She was speaking in a low, hushed voice. "No, I can't talk right now," she whispered. "I'll call you tomorrow." She hung up and turned, and when she saw me, she flinched, a guilty look flashing across her face. It might have been her mother. It might have been Carol. But in that split second, all I could see was David. All I could feel was that sickening lurch of suspicion. And I realized that this would be my life. Forever. A lifetime of second-guessing every phone call, every late night at work, every unfamiliar perfume. The trust wasn't just broken. It was vaporized. It could never be rebuilt because the blueprint itself was a lie. In that moment, the debate in my head finally ended. The grief was still there, a vast and aching sea, but for the first time, I could see the shore. I knew what I had to do. The only question was how to begin. The morning after my decision solidified was quiet, like the eerie calm after a devastating flood. The waters had receded, leaving behind a landscape of wreckage and mud. I woke up in the guest room feeling, for the first time in weeks, not a raging inferno of anger or a hollow void of shock, but a grim, quiet sense of purpose. The internal war was over. I had chosen a path. It was a path through rubble and thorns, but it was a path forward. I walked out to the kitchen. Sarah was there, nursing a cup of coffee, staring out the window at the garden we had planted together. She looked smaller, diminished, a shadow of the vibrant woman I once knew. She looked up as I entered, her eyes filled with a desperate, pleading hope that I was about to extinguish. I didn't sit down. I stood across the island from her, a wide expanse of granite separating our two worlds. "Sarah," I said, my voice steady, "I've spent the last week thinking about everything, about us." She put her mug down, her hands trembling slightly. "Mark, I know Please, just let me finish," I said, holding up a hand. I needed to say this without interruption, before my resolve could be chipped away by her tears. I've thought about our 15 years. I've thought about the good times. And I've thought about what you did. And I've realized something. It's not about forgiveness. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, but that's not even the point. The point is trust. I told her about the moment I'd seen her on the phone the night before. I explained the cold, sickening jolt of suspicion, the immediate assumption of the worst. That's my life now if I stay, I said, my voice heavy with a sadness that went deeper than anger. I will spend the rest of my life watching you, doubting you, questioning every late night, every text message. I'll become a bitter, paranoid man, and you'll be living in a prison, trying to prove your innocence every single day. We won't be husband and wife. We'll be a warden and his inmate. Cannot live like that, and I won't do that to either of us. Tears began to stream down her face again, but this time, they were silent. The fight had gone out of her. So what are you saying? She whispered, though she already knew the answer. I'm saying it's over, I said. I want a divorce. The word hung in the air, final and absolute. She choked back a sob and nodded, finally accepting the inevitable consequence she had set in motion 2 years ago. I'll do whatever you want, she said, her voice cracking. I'll move out. We'll figure it out. I'm so sorry, Mark. I am so sorry. Her apology, which I had craved for so long, now felt like a postscript to a book that was already closed. It meant nothing. I walked out of the kitchen and went to the back patio, my phone in my hand. I Googled divorce lawyers in my area. My thumb hovered over the call button for a moment that felt like an eternity. This was the final act, the step that would turn the emotional reality into a legal one. I pressed the button. A calm, professional voice answered on the other end. Miller and Associates, how can I help you? I took a deep breath, the cool morning air filling my lungs. Hello? I said, the words feeling foreign and strange in my own mouth. My name is Mark, and I need to file for divorce. Saying it aloud to a stranger made it real. The gears of a new life had begun to turn. I looked through the glass door at the home we had built, at the woman who was now just a co-owner of a property we would have to divide. The raw, searing pain was still there, a hot coal in my chest, but for the first time, I felt something else alongside it. The faintest, most fragile flicker of a future that was my own. I had finally turned the last page of this chapter. The stories we build our lives upon are so incredibly fragile, aren't they? We believe in the solidity of shared memories, in the promises whispered in the dark, in the comfortable rhythm of a life lived together. We build our homes on a foundation of trust, never thinking to check for the cracks that can form over time, the slow, silent erosion that can happen right under our feet until one day, the entire structure gives way. The pain of a betrayal like this isn't just in the act itself. It's in the complete and total demolition of your own history. You're left standing in the wreckage, forced to re-examine every memory, every anniversary, every loving gesture. All of it now tainted by the devastating light of a secret truth. The path forward from that kind of ruin is a long and quiet one, and it's a journey you have to take alone. These stories are hard to tell, and they are so much harder to live through. But I've found that sharing them, speaking the truth of the pain out loud, is a crucial part of the process. It's how we begin to reclaim our own narrative. If you found some meaning in hearing this part of my story, or if it resonated with the difficult chapters in your own life, please consider leaving a like on the video. It helps to know we're not alone in these experiences. And if you wish to join us as we explore more of these complex human stories, subscribing to the channel ensures you'll be here for what comes next. Thank you for being here and for listening. It's time to start writing a new chapter.